Chief Flight Instructor at the Davenport location for Carver Aero.
Yeah, we just want to get on here and ask any or answer any questions that potential flight students might want to know. This will be obviously recorded, and you can play this back when it's done. Starting out, is it difficult to fly an aircraft?
I'd say it's difficult to do it well. I mean, the airplane, they're designed like they want to fly, but to do it well and to keep, stay organized, to talk to ATC and do all the things that the airplane is actually capable of, but to do them well, that's where the difficulty would come in. But the airplane wants to fly, ultimately. So.
Yeah, we got some more people joining in. If you have any questions, just put them in the comments below, and we kind of have some commonly asked questions that we'll be answering. But if you have any questions that we haven't thought of, and you have, we'll be more than glad to answer. When can you begin flying? What age, or how soon?
I mean, you can start flying at any age with the instructor. Once you go to solo, you're required to have a student pilot certificate, which you have to be 16 years old to obtain, and you also have to be able to read and speak English and stuff properly. So you can start at any age, but to be able to solo, you have to be 16.
And then, if somebody was interested and ready to go, when can they start with us?
If they want to start training at Carver Aero, you mean? When can
Yeah,
they start?
yeah.
We usually don't, I wouldn't want to start flying with like a 10-year-old, for example, because even once they get ready to solo, you wouldn't be able to solo them for 6 years in that scenario. So we usually don't start working with students until they're about 15 or 16, because they can't get their private certificate until they're 17. So if you start too early, you're just going to be in this weird lull where you have all the requirements met, but can't take the check ride. So I'd say like 16 is when we can usually start working with students at Carver.
Okay, a lot of people might be interested in flying, but they might have some apprehension because it's a weird experience and it can feel weird. Is it safe to fly?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely safe to fly. I mean, these airplanes are pretty meticulously maintained by certified mechanics. They don't skimp on any of that stuff. They're highly maintained. There's a lot of regulations out there put in place that we've gotten from other people's mistakes. We've learned from other people's mistakes. We're following these set regulations to make sure it's safe. And you combine that with just good judgment, and I mean, it's definitely safe nowadays to be flying an airplane.
What are the eligibility requirements to become a student pilot or a student with us?
Student pilot, you just have to be 16 years old to get the student certificate. Again, you can begin training with an instructor at a younger age, but to get the student pilot certificate, you have to be 16 and then read, speak, and write English, like we mentioned earlier. Then to get the private certificate, you have to be 17, commercial certificate 18, ATP, I believe, is 21, 23, 21. I'd have to check the regulations to verify that on the ATP.
All right, where can a student obtain ground and flight school training?
Well, I mean, obviously with Carver Aero, the ground and flight training both. They offer online ground schools that are great to use to make that more affordable. So if you're paying an instructor to sit with you and go through the 40 hours of material, it's going to be quite a bit more. But there's online resources that can make that more affordable for you. And the flight training, I mean, you need an instructor and a good airplane to be using, which Carver Aero has both of those. So.
Yes, and just so our viewers know, we do have locations obviously here in Davenport. We do some training in Muscatine as well, and we just recently acquired FBO in Council Bluffs that's actually a Part 141 school. So those would also be all great options of where you could flight train. Another common question a lot of students ask is there a set number of hours, or how many hours does it require for them to solo?
There's no time requirement on soloing an airplane. There's a certain amount of things that need to be covered as far as training. Like, for example, stalls, basic landings, things like that. There's a list in the regulations that needs to be covered, and then obviously you have to have an instructor that feels safe with you in the airplane by yourself, and they have to give you the proper endorsements. But as far as hours, there's no actual set requirement. Usually it's around 10 to 20 hours. The lowest I've ever had was a student solo at 9.9 hours, and that was quick. He was doing exceptionally well.
When would a student need to get a student pilot certificate?
I kind of mentioned it a little bit throughout the other questions, but they need the student pilot certificate once they go to solo. They can begin the training without it, but once they're in the airplane by themselves, they need to have a medical and they need a student pilot certificate.
And what does a solo, after you solo, what can you do after that? Is there limitations to what you can do after your solo?
Yeah, there's a lot of limitations. The instructor has to give you the proper endorsements, and then even then you're really restricted on what you can do, but it makes it more affordable. You don't need an instructor with you for all 40 hours that's required for your private certificate. You can do up to half of it solo, meaning you can basically just go out to the north practice area on days that the instructor has said it's okay for you to do so, and then do what you guys have already covered together. It's not going to be anything really new by yourself, or nothing new by yourself. It's stuff that's already been covered.
What level, there's 3 different levels of medical certificates that you can get. What levels do you recommend for who?
There's a first class, a second class, and a third class medical. They each have their own privileges that they, gives you the right to do. But the first class is generally what you're going to see for like airlines. Second class is generally for a commercial certificate, so somebody that's flying pipeline or survey. And the third class is generally going to be for your private pilot certificates. Anybody that's interested in a career in aviation, I would suggest whatever your end goal is, whatever requirement, whatever medical certificate that requires, that's the one I'd get right at the start, which would usually be the first class for everybody, just to rule out any chances of like underlying heart conditions, anything, any hidden medical things that might disqualify you in the future. Because it'd be a bummer to get your third class, go through all that training, and then get to the point you need to get your first class and then get declined due to something you can't change. Kind of be a waste of all that training and money and experience. So I would recommend, the highest.
And where do you get a medical certificate from?
Aviation Medical Examiner. You can find a list of them on FAA.gov. You can look up local ones in your area, just a quick Google search really. I use Dr. Thomas Aid over in Moline. He's able to offer third, second, and third class medicals. But yeah, you can find.
What types of things would disqualify you?
You can find that list, again on the FAA website.
And then if somebody does have a physical disability or illness, is there any provisions for getting a medical, and how is that done?
It'd be up to the discretion of the medical examiner for sure. That's going to have the final say. You're going to present them with all the information. They're going to request things from you, and you present that, and then they'll make the decision. I've had students that have had issues with, like they have ADHD, and they take medications for that. They had to go through a process to get their medical, and they eventually did get their medical. It took a little bit of paperwork, quite a bit of work on their end, but they were able to get past ADHD, which is something that people might not expect to be a disqualifying factor. But it'd be up to the discretion of the examiner on if your condition is going to be unrelated.
All right, and then another common question people want to know is the cost, obviously, because that's the determining factor for many people. Can you talk about the cost that we have here at Carver?
So our costs are broken down by how many hours you're actually flying. Per flight hour, you pay for the airplane. In our 140s, it's $135 an hour. And then for the instructor, it's another $60 an hour. So total for that airplane with an instructor, it's $195 per hour. And you need a minimum of 40 hours for your private certificate. So you can kind of do the math on that, and it breaks down to about $7,000. But then there's some additional expenses, like books, like if you do an online ground school, the written exam you need to take, the check ride fees and stuff. So I'd put the figure more realistically around $8,000 to $9,000 for a private certificate nowadays.
And then, what is a good time frame for just getting your private, and then if you're looking for this as a possible career change or possibly just a career out of high school, what is the time frame on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Depends a lot on the specific person. How often are you able to fly per week due to availability or due to funds in general? We had one student who's actually an instructor for us now and flying in our charter department come through from 0 time to CFI, and then actually got his CFII and his MEI as well in 6 months and 3 weeks all the way to the MEI. But he had a job here after basically 6 months from 0 time to CFI. But he was changing careers, so he had all the time, all the finances. None of that was limiting for him, and put in a lot of hard work to get it done as well.
And what type of aircraft do we have here?
So at the Davenport location, we've got a Cessna 172, and then we've got a Piper Cherokee, a couple Piper Warriors, and a Piper Arrow that we do our training in. The Warriors are the big one, that and the Cherokee for the 140 for the private students to begin in, and then you'd upgrade up to like the Arrow once you get more towards the commercial and CFI mindset.
Can you talk about the aircraft that we have at Council Bluffs as well?
Oh yeah, Council Bluffs has I think 16 to 19. I'm not exactly sure on it. It's 19 aircraft out in Council Bluffs that mostly consists of their 172s. I believe they have a 152, a Piper Arrow, and then a multi-engine trainer, a Duchess, out there as well. So, but it's mostly 172s out there.
All right, and then what equipment, headsets, or technology and books do you recommend that a student gets for their training?
It's always nice to have your own headset for sure. We have headsets available for rent here, or actually they're free. We provide them as long as you're renting the airplane and the instructor and stuff. So I kind of recommend that until you solo. Once you've soloed and you know you're for sure this is something you're going to do, that's when I would kind of invest the money in the headset. It can be anywhere from, you can get cheaper ones for $150 up to $1,100 for the Bose A20s. But having your own headset's pretty nice. An iPad, so you can have ForeFlight is a nice resource as well. It's not required by any means, but it definitely helps, especially with the instrument training. But it just adds a lot to safety on situational awareness and having your sectional, your charts, your regulations. That's all within that app, and it updates automatically for you with your subscription. And then there's some FAA handbooks that I would recommend to students that are beginning out or starting out, but that would be more, I'd talk to the student once they've already started to recommend which specific books.
When do you recommend getting a logbook for a student pilot?
You can log your intro flight, and all the flight hours are valuable. So I would suggest getting the logbook at your intro flight or shortly after. You can backlog that flight with the instructor. So once you do your intro flight, that's when I'd probably purchase one off Amazon or something.
And what types of jobs can you get once you get through your commercial pilot certificate? What are some of those things you can do?
Yeah, so with the commercial pilot certificate, you can look at Part 119, which runs through the privileges of that certificate, and it's pretty limiting, but it opens up a lot of doors for you. So like the commercial certificate, you can conduct sightseeing flights, photo flights, aerial surveying, pipeline flying, take skydivers up, drop them off, kind of thing. But then it makes you eligible for your CFI certificate, which is where a lot of opportunities are going to start coming in. But yeah, you can actually look at the FAR AIM Part 119 runs through the exact privileges and limitations of the commercial certificate.
All right, and then anybody that hasn't heard, if you have any questions that we haven't asked so far, go ahead, feel free to comment below and ask those questions, and we'll be more than happy to answer them. What are the hours required to obtain each license?
The private certificate is 40 hours if you're flying under a Part 61 school, which is what the Carver and Davenport is. If you're under a Part 141 operation, it's 35 hours for the private certificate. The commercial certificate is 250 hours under Part 61. It's 190 hours under Part 141. And then the CFI doesn't have any additional hour requirements. You're eligible once you get your commercial certificate, but you have to be able to pass the check ride, which is a pretty thorough, very tough check ride as far as the areas of knowledge and then being able to demonstrate in the airplane. Which obviously, if you're going to be teaching people, you'd have to have a pretty well-rounded.
What are some of the things that might disqualify you from flying or getting a medical certificate?
I mean, like heart conditions, visual impairments, hearing impairments can make it more difficult. But for me to list them off specifically, I wouldn't want to list them off. I would just suggest you schedule a consult with an aviation medical examiner, and they can give you a solid answer on that if there's anything that's raising concerns.
Do we have a ground school program?
If we have enough demand for it, enough inquiries from people, we'll actually set up a ground school that we conduct a couple times a week, just on in the evenings. I did one of those last winter. That ran. It was like Tuesday, Thursdays, 7 to 9 p.m. or something, because that's when people were available for. No, it was 6 to 8 p.m. That's when people were available after work. We had enough demand. We had 11 students in that ground school in person, which was nice. But if there's just not the demand, we don't conduct one. But if you were interested, you could. We can have a list at Carver. If you call and put your name on that list, and we get enough people on the list, we'll start up a ground school for you guys if there's enough demand.
What is the difference between 141 schools and 161 schools?
Yeah, good question. The 141 is referring to things like University of Dubuque or these organized flight schools that are kind of tied together with a college. And under those, they're following a lot more, I wouldn't say rigid training, because the training we do at the Part 61 is just as legitimate. It's just a little more intense, high pace. They're kind of assuming that student is flying 5 days a week or multiple times a week. The Part 61 is more aimed at a casual student. So Part 141 is kind of referring to like a college flight school. Part 61 is just learning how to fly at your local airport. I did Part 61 for all mine. Cameron, that student that just finished in 6 months, did all his Part 61. So I mean, they're both definitely valid, credible options, but that would be the difference between the two.
What are the limits on how many times you can attempt a check ride?
No, there's no limits on how many times you can attempt a check ride. It's pretty common for a student to have to cover the areas of deficiency, like maybe they'd have a couple areas, 1 or 2, and then they reschedule the check ride just to make up those couple areas of deficiency. Then they happen to mess up one of those again, and they'd have to come back a third time. Our students usually get it done by the second try, but there is no set limit. If whatever the circumstances are, if it led to a third, a fourth, a fifth, however many attempts, you could keep trying.
All right, and then at what points do you have to take exams and check rides?
Yeah, good question. So to be eligible, the first real check ride you're going to run into is going to be your private pilot check ride, which consists of a ground oral portion with the examiner, where we're sitting at a table just like this, and they'd be asking you questions over the required areas of knowledge. If that goes well and you pass that, then there's the practical portion of the check ride, which again has specified areas of coverage in the airman certification standards for whatever certificate you're applying for. But before you're eligible for that check ride for the private, you just have to do a written knowledge test, which you can schedule actually at Carver as well, the PSI testing center that's here. And that's a written exam. They're basically making sure you have enough basic knowledge to proceed, with so you're not wasting your time as much.
What are the solo requirements for a private pilot?
The solo requirements?
Or how many hours and what is required to do in solo before you're private pilot? Such as cross countries.
Oh, what are the aeronautical experience requirements for your private certificate? Yeah, so you need 40 hours total time for your private certificate. Those are the Part 61 requirements. 20 hours of that would have to be with an instructor. 10 of it would have to be solo. 5 of those solo hours need to be cross-country, which means you've flown from your departure airport to another airport that's over 50 nautical miles away. So like Davenport to Cedar Rapids would qualify. There's a special cross-country in there that has to be 3 points. So like Dubuque, Cedar Rapids, and back is a common one we do. Then there's going to be 3 hours of night flight time, which has to consist of a cross-country. And then 10 takeoffs and landings to a full stop. But those 3 hours of night flight are done with an instructor. There's going to be 3 hours of simulated instrument flight time, meaning you're wearing a pair of goggles, or you are actually in real clouds with the instructor on both of those, and getting 3 hours of that flight time, which basically means you're just flying solely off the instruments. You're not looking outside the airplane for that 3 hours. So if you were to inadvertently enter a cloud, you could handle the situation to get yourself out of it.
Is there a specific online ground school that you recommend?
That's another good question. I use King Schools for my CFI ground school. I've also heard good things about the Sporties online ground school. So I would suggest King School or Sporties for a couple. Gleam is another one, or Gleim, however it's pronounced. But I've heard better feedback from the Sporties and the King School, honestly. So.
Is there a program or software that you would recommend for studying for written exams?
Sporties has a pretty good online resource for prepping for the knowledge exams. I think King School also offers that as well. And people also use a program called Shepherd Air for anything after the private certificate. But Sporties and King School are really well-rounded online resources for that.
What are the different flight requirements for different jobs, such as a chief pilot or corporate pilot, airline pilot?
That's a really loaded question. It really depends on what you're doing. So it'd be like a chief pilot at an operation, like a Part 135 operation. They'd have set requirements on the level of experience they're looking at. I actually don't know exactly what the requirements would be. That'd be worth Googling on that one for sure. But again, they're all so individual to whatever the job is. Like corporate pilots, they're obviously going to need more like twin turbine time than like what a crop duster might need, which is going to be a training program down in Texas for crop dusting. So I'd say that'd be more of a Googling question, or just sitting down and talking with an instructor one-on-one for that type of question. To be like a flight instructor, again, it's just you're eligible once you get your commercial pilot certificate to try and obtain your flight instructor certificate. And once you get that, then you're eligible to instruct.
And then anybody that hasn't heard, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments below and we'll answer them. One thing I don't think we've touched on yet, and I feel is important for a lot of people that are looking for a job as a pilot, is the requirement for college. And many people don't know that college isn't technically required, and that this allows you to have a successful career, and you don't need college for it either. College isn't necessarily for everyone, and I mean, somebody that might be interested in this might appreciate the need not to go to college. That's not saying that we don't recommend a college degree, but this kind of gives you the option whether you as a person want to do that or not. And the nice thing about our flight school is you can go through all of your flight training with us, and there's many colleges out there that allow you to pick us, and you can get your college degree, bachelor's, through them and still fly with us without having to pay the massive price that college flight schools have.
Yeah, so a degree is not necessarily required. I did not have a 4-year degree when I became a flight instructor initially. Attained an associate's afterwards, and then in the process of finishing up my bachelor's, but did not need that in order to flight instruct. Airlines do require like a 4-year degree, and then a lot of corporate gigs, which is usually after airlines. Corporate pilots that's more of an end game type of thing. They would generally want their corporate pilots to have a 4-year degree as well, just to kind of make them more qualified all around, set them apart from the other people trying to apply.
Do we currently have a loan or payment program?
We have it set up at Carver Aero here that you can put money down on account, like $5,000 for example, and we'll give you a 10% credit on top of that, which helps negate a lot of the interest if you were to go to your local bank and get a personal loan, take that $5,000 and put it on account. The interest, or the money we're willing to give on top of that, kind of cancels out the interest you'd be paying on that loan. And then heck, I think you'd know, wasn't there a program you were kind of looking into?
Yeah, we are in the process of looking through possible options for that people could pull out a loan and fly with us, but as of right now, that's not official.
Okay.
What's a typical day look like for a CFI?
Another good question. So it varies quite a bit, but the general theme, like let's see, for today, we'll just look at that. I had a student scheduled at 9 a.m. We were working on his complex endorsement, meaning retractable gear, constant speed propeller. We were kind of working on him getting an endorsement to be able to fly airplanes like that. We did that from 9 to about lunch, noon or so. I ate lunch, then I met with another student that is working on his CFII. So he's already got his flight instructor, now he's trying to add on an instrument rating to that certificate. So we began his training on that, and then went up with another student afterwards, and it's another one of our instructors actually, and he was wanting to brush up on some spins. He was about to go up with one of his students to demonstrate spins to them. I think they're actually up in the air right now. And he wanted to brush up with me on spins real quick, so we went up and took our 172, did I think six spins or so, and then came back, and then now I'm here.
And then somebody's asking about our training fleet. What is our what planes we have?
Oh yeah, that question. We got a 172. We've got a Piper 140 here. We've got a couple Warriors, Piper Aero at this location. At our Council Bluffs location, we have 19 airplanes that are mostly Cessna 172s. There's also a Cessna 152, a Piper Aero, and then a Duchess, which is a multi-engine trainer out at the Council Bluffs location.
Are there any scholarships or grants for adults that can help pay for flight school?
Let's see, for adults, I'm sure there are, not that I'm specifically aware of. That'd be a good question for Google. I know the EAA offers scholarships for students under the age of 18, which wouldn't help the adult person probably asking that question. But yeah, that'd be a good question for Google, looking up local scholarships for, do you know of any?
I can't think of any scholarships or grants. I know there are some out there. What I'll also mention is there are schools such as Utah Valley University and Liberty University that offer students to pick their own flight school, and then you can get through scholarships from there, grants from there, financial aid from there. That would help with paying for the cost of flying. That's all I really know of grants or anything funding in general, just to help. Let's see here. Can you bring your own plane to train with us?
Yeah, I do training in like the T-hangar guys, which are the local hangars at the Davenport Airport where local citizens keep their airplanes that they own. I've done training with those guys in their airplanes. You'd just be paying for the instructor at that point, which would be $60, same instruction fee as if you were in one of ours. Yeah, as long as it's an airplane that we're we're able to fly, which would be most of the T-hangar airplanes.
And if somebody is interested in flying and starting their flight training, what are the steps to do that with us? How do they get started through us?
Yeah, if you want to start flight training here at Carver Aero, be calling. You can Google Carver Aero online and call the number for Davenport. That'd get you in touch with our front desk person, whoever it may be at the time. Then they would leave a message or get you in touch with a flight instructor. You could sit down and talk to them, or we'd give you a call back and talk through your specific situation and how you'd want to proceed. And so yeah, to get started, be calling us and setting up a meeting, setting up something, and then that's the ball rolling right there.
Alrighty. I think that'll conclude our live today. Thanks to everyone for joining in. And just want to mention, we are having kind of a contest or engagement, and if you like, share, and comment on this video after it's done, we're offering to the winner a lanyard, and then we have a Carver Aero mask as well. And I don't have it with me right now. It will also include a Carver Aero water bottle. So, all right, thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to possibly hearing from you guys.